Welcome to another episode of The Growth Compass. Shout out to our sponsor, Senders. If you want to do cold email deliverability correctly, hit the link in the description. And without them, I would not be able to interview awesome people like Julius. Welcome.
Thank you very much. It's great to be here.
What is going on today? So I think there's a lot of interesting stuff that you're doing, a lot of really cool ideas that you speak about that I've been reading about, and it's cool to now hear it from your own mind. So if you could give a quick introduction of who you are and what you do before we jump into.
Sure. Yeah. My name is Julius Bachmann. I'm based over here in Berlin, Germany. A father of two, a husband of one, as it goes over here.
Yeah.
I used to be a venture investor before that, and for much longer, I used to do all of that as a musician. But then I found my way into a proper job, which is venture capital investing into startups. And then over time, I realized that there was absolutely no support system in the community that I was in for the people who create the most value, the entrepreneurs, but also the investors. And that's a couple of years ago, but I decided I would make that my mission. And so for the past 6 or 7 years, I have worked with predominantly CEOs of private businesses with about 50 to 500 employees, helping them navigate their toughest challenges, but also navigating tensions in relationships with maybe their employees, their business partners, their investors. And it's been a lot of fun, and I intend to do that for a while longer.
Awesome.
Here we
So
are.
at what point, so there's a lot that I want to cover there because I am very passionate about headspace and the things that don't get, I think, well, luckily, I think they've been brought into more mainstream media spaces more recently about emotional capacity and struggles of growing a business in that way. So there's a lot of questions I think I
Right.
want to cover there. But just before we get there, how long has it been since you've been doing that full time?
Coaching full time took about a year to scale up. That being said, I think it's important to understand that I came from a community of practitioners, the venture industry that is relatively tight knit over here in Europe. So I knew all of the multipliers. When I left my investing job, I first worked as an interim financial director for businesses. So I was already like a freelance
Okay,
person.
got it.
People knew I was offering services. So it's not as like a clear cut, like I'm setting out into the wild, there's nothing there. And then it takes a year to build it up. Like I had all the connections already and the doors would open for me.
Okay.
So yeah, so 6 years.
All right, awesome. So we'll go with that framework. So quickly before we get into that content, I want to dig a little deeper about the experiences that led you to that place. So mainly, you said
Right.
before the investing chapter,
Mm.
there was a musical chapter. And that was mainly what you were doing, or
No, that wasn't mainly what I was doing. That very much so was what was on my mind most of the time, but it wasn't what I was paid for.
got it.
Mm. Um, at the time when I was investing, I had a band. We were touring, basically. So I haven't said this publicly yet. So my former boss might notice, like, "Hmm, this is a different story that I heard." But I was investing in a full-time job. But the reality of it was that I didn't really spend like 100% of my time on that. I spent a good chunk of my time on like managing the band, writing songs, coordinating the tour, and stuff like that. So I was the band manager, and then the band fell apart. I was like, what do I do with like all the time that I used to spend on music?
That's crazy.
I'm certainly not going to like reinvest that in a job that I proved to myself I could do on like significantly fewer hours. So then I was like, maybe I need a change. And then I quit. And it was pretty quickly, and it was even for me because I was until that point I was just an employee, like someone who was employed, and I didn't think about entrepreneurship other than like investing into entrepreneurs, right? I never considered myself to become an entrepreneur, and here I was, and I have my boss on the line, And I still remember I was walking through Vienna, Austria, walking through Vienna, and the conversation goes, and I'm kind of like talking about where I'm at. And he's like, "So you want to quit, don't you?" And I was like, "Yes, I do." Yeah, this is how it went. And then from there on, I continued to make music, but it took a long while until I did so again in like a professional quality. Last year, I released an album called Freedom slash Hope, and partly played on this guitar.
Look at that.
And yeah, but that was kind of 5 years in the making because I had to first like learn to swim on my own.
Yeah. So then after you quit, did you go into a different style of if it wasn't music full time, did you go into a different style of investing or something like that? What was the next professional chapter for you after you quit?
Yeah, after I quit, because I knew the market of the investing market really well, a lot of entrepreneurs knew me, and a lot of entrepreneurs were interested in working with me on raising funds for their businesses and just generally in kind of structuring financial processes, which just proved the point that I knew how to be in business advisory, and it was a valuable asset to them. And that for I would say like a year was my main gig, but it was an interim job where I would work with one firm and then with another firm and then with two companies at a time. And I would do this like as part-time contracts. Um, and then I would observe similar dynamics that I had also observed in my previous role as an investor, that I sensed that those entrepreneurs were under tremendous pressure, but there was no one that they could talk to.
See, okay,
And
yeah.
suddenly there was this guy, this like finance advisor, and they're like pouring out all of the sorrows and like questions and whatever they wanted to share, right? And so I realized there's more. It wasn't my role as an investor that like maybe the unique vantage point that made me think that there's someone needed to support entrepreneurs. I had the same realization when I was in a different role. And I also noticed that there were a number of like really puzzling team dynamics that I realized I couldn't solve with the limited tools I had. Those tools were like financial processes and like how to structure a financing round and like how to create fear of missing out in the investment industry when you're trying to get your company funded. And that's when I decided to actually get like a proper coaching certification, which took like 13 months and was really, really valuable.
Wow.
But yeah, so this is like the trajectory that I took after quitting my full-time job, my last full-time job.
Got it. And so you piece these things together, you got the certification, and then you said, okay, I'm in a position to now do this company.
Yeah, exactly. So this company being Bachman Catalyst, that's
Right.
my coaching company. Right.
Understood. Okay. So before we get into a lot of the interesting things, the experiences you've had, conversations you've had, I like to try to frame how your past experiences led to you being the person that ultimately took the leap into doing something full time. And I like that your perspective includes music. So I'd like, if possible, for you to say one thing that music has given you or your experience, maybe managing that band or something that led you to being able to launch your firm.
Right. Well, so what I do is I work with creative leaders who create things where there was nothing before. Very much like artists, and they are connected to their work, their life's work, in the same way that artists relate to their life's work. It's like a baby, which means there is a lot of emotional connection going on. It also means that whenever you put together a team to make that happen, maybe on a bigger scale, maybe on a commercial scale, that these emotions are sometimes hard to manage. And that there is a lot of coordination going on when you have different people who either know how to play a piano or know how to play a guitar, right? Or know how to sing. Those are different skills. Those are very different roles, especially for those, and you know this, especially for those who are at the front of the stage, who have to do all the show, right? All the front man things. And what really helped me from the music perspective kind of understand and I think excel in the coaching realm is to carry with me the metaphor of a band and how a band is playing together on stage, in the studio, and just jamming, vibing, but also off stage, how they coordinate, who's driving the tour bus, because for most of the bands, they're not going on like a private jet, like from concert to concert. Who's driving the tour bus? Who's packing up the stage? Who's even organizing that we have all the gear to go on tour? Who's even booking the tour? There's a ton of work that goes into being an artist and musical artist to work together as a band that is absolutely not music. And I saw these different kind of processes of collaboration, these different roles, these different dynamics. And it's very much the same when I look at teams that I work with nowadays, teams of entrepreneurs, management teams, executive teams of businesses. It's pretty complex. It's sometimes chaotic, right? It's emotional. It touches creativity in a very specific way because they're building something new. And that's a guiding metaphor of my work.
That was awesome. Music is very close to me. I'm also a musician, so I appreciate you putting into words how closely related building something like a business or being an entrepreneur is to being an
Right.
artist. Because I hear you, I feel you. So, something that I'm curious about is, like you just said, working with these teams, managing these emotions, these people, trying to bring the best out of team members. All of these aspects can be complex. And I'm curious if you see anything. Do you approach any of these projects with a repeatable structure? Like, is there absolutely questions you need to get through before you can start dealing with the things that make these teams unique?
Yes, there's a repeatable structure. The way I arrived at that structure that I use was basically to work for the first 5 years and see what sticks. And then looking at all of my notes and the feedback and the recommendations and identifying where did I create the most value at what stage in the process? And how might that be related to the way I approached the client, the way I approached the work, the methods that I used? And then kind of re engineering a process that would contain all of the most valuable pieces so I can bring them right to the beginning of the process. So, what I do today is with any client that signs up to work with me, is that in the first 2 to 3 months, we go through a number of coaching sessions that are oriented around specific formats. For example, first of all, I really want to understand what the underlying topics are. If you were to come to me as a coaching client, you would probably come with like, the reason I reached out to you is why. And then we would have a conversation, and over time, we would realize that there's also X, another challenge. There is B, which is another challenge. Also, we end up talking a lot about Melissa, whoever is Melissa, who is like, contributing to some of these challenges and the relationship that you have and maybe the tensions that you have. Also, oh, by the way, there is tension F. And there's this other business. Oh, I forgot to tell you
Interesting.
about the other business that I had, right? And so we're just trying to like map out the complexity that is there at the time when you're coming in. And we're trying to understand how all of these topics and people are connected. Because ultimately, what turns out most of the time is where we then start working is rarely the question that the clients came in with in the beginning, if they even came with a question and not some unspecific unease to say, something's not right, but I don't know what it is. Can you help me figure it out? So that's what we're doing in the first session. Then we're focusing on, because that's only your perspective, dear client. We need other people's perspective because one like that's one way that you see the world. It's not that your map is not the territory. So we need to get other people's perspectives in. So we have the inside perspective and the outside perspectives. And then we start to develop a real picture. We also have a structured, I say we, but like I have a structured tool to evaluate the key relationships and the key stakeholders in your business or in your life to understand how to improve the quality of those relationships. And those are like the main anchors of the first 2 to 3 months of working with me. And from there, I then might decide together with a client that we're extending the work that we're already doing into the team or into specific relationships, let's say with your business partner, or just go on one. It might just also be that we already solved the most pressing challenges and we say, that's enough. Thank you very much. It took 2 months. I'm a very big fan of the return on investment equation to say coaching is an investment. Please only invest in coaching when you very clearly see that there's a positive return. And if that's not happening, step back, take a break. I'm very wary of the coaches who say, sign up for my 12-month something. Like, who knows whether that's valuable 7 months from now? The world will have changed.
Yeah.
I might have changed. The coach might have changed. So yeah.
Do you work in particular industries with particular types of businesses?
Yes. I work with mostly high tech startups between 50 and 500 employees in size, typically based in Europe, more specifically in the German speaking countries, in the UK, some of them in Israel. My clients tend to be between 28-ish. So they're roughly like plus minus 10 or 13 years of my age. They're often male. The reason for that being is mostly because there are so many male entrepreneurs in the startup ecosystem still. So the it's reflective of the ecosystem, and many of them are financed by venture capital or private equity investors. So that's probably like those are the dimensions that I can name that make up my clientele right now. There are others, but I would say that's maybe 70% of my clients check out on those criteria.
Yeah. So, when in your experience working with those types of clients, let's just take the most common group.
Mhm.
Do you see that there are common patterns across these types of businesses, these types of individuals, maybe?
Yeah, there are. I think one is they are starting a business because they have an unsatiable curiosity, but also wild ambition. That wild ambition may turn into the hustle. More is more. I'll just throw myself into the work. And then over time, as the organization grows, they have to consciously take a step back and understand how they're gaining personal leverage through better relationships to their employees, better employees, like hiring the right people, better systems and processes, clarity on their own positioning, their own brand, their values, what they stand for, to be able to step off of the kind of the hustle treadmill and to find a new way to relate to their ambition and to maybe realize their ambition. So that's one pattern. I see a lot of my clients just transforming their drive and urgency. Not that they're letting go of the drive, but they're transforming it into something that is more sustainable, that they can apply at scale, not with 50 employees, but with 500 or like 1,500 employees. That's certainly one of the common factors.
Is there anything that you could say to here? How about this? Because this is something that I run into. I do have a decent, just because of my circles, the types of people that I like, the things I'm doing in my own life, the types of ambitions that I have. I run into a lot of people who are on that, like, just go, go, go. um I believe in, more sustainability as far as drive goes, and the amount of productivity that you can achieve if you're not just going all the time and you're investing in other places, like in yourself, a creative outlet, relationships, these types of things. A lot of times I run into a conversation where someone says that is bullshit, where they go like, I need to be doing the work, or else, like someone's
Right.
going to outwork me. So how do you respond if that's something that you run into as well?
So first of all, it's totally okay to say I'm a competitive person, right? And I'm looking left and right at everyone else who's working hard. So I guess I have to work hard. But if we think about that growth curve as a continuous curve, right, where more input yields more output, then we're just doing incremental growth, right? Incremental change, a little more and a little more, and a little more input yields a little more output. Typically, the curve has like a marginal, right? At some point, it flattens off. And if we stay with kind of the mental model of a function of a growth curve, if you want to produce a step change, then you have to think about how that function even works, how you're turning input into output. And that's where um, many entrepreneurs at different points in their entrepreneurial journey, multiple points in their entrepreneurial journey, have to reconsider and reconfigure the way they work and the way they make sense of the work and the world so they can make a jump rather than just another step forward, yet another step forward, yet another step forward. So it's basically like you can step on the gas pedal harder, and you can do that to a certain extent. At some point, the car will fail. But if you really want to turn your pickup truck into a race car, you have to start working on the engine and on all of the other parts that tend to go into a race car rather than a pickup truck. Yes, that's how I look at it.
Wow, that was amazing. I cannot wait to use that in my next conversation. That
Pickup
different.
truck.
Well, I mean, that's a good visual, but that really, that idea of like, okay, a little bit more work turns into a little bit more output, just, not step by step. If you want to make this type of change, which everyone does, and that's why they're putting in all of the work,
Yeah.
then
And I
you have
relate.
to. So I appreciate that.
Yeah. The thing is, we chatted about the book before we came on. The one reason I wanted to write a book, in like let alone the topic, but I generally was interested in writing a book, was that I wanted to slow down and deeply invest myself into a topic so that I become such an expert that I come out the other end of this process at a different level. Because I could very much say, okay, just from a business perspective, how can I shave off like 7% of this process and like charge a little more and like take two more clients, and then my revenues would increase by 20%. I could do that. I have done that for the last years. It works, but it doesn't create this like, wow, I'm operating at another level. It always means I'm kind of like half steps ahead. And so I apply the same technique, the same way when I recorded the album. It was a challenge for me because working with a professional producer, a professional band, after like 5 years of pretty much like being out of the game, well, that was a ton of work. It was very humbling. I was at all points the least creative in the room, the least talented in the room, but I was the main gig.
Yeah,
So
yeah, yeah.
so yeah, I try to put myself into these situations where I'm just like forcing myself to struggle in a different dimension. And it's not about the struggle, but it's about like what I'm learning and how I'm coming out the other end.
So I have two more questions for you, unfortunately, because this is I love these conversations. You mentioned the book, and one of the quotes that you have on your content about it, it says, responsibility is not a burden we divide, it is a relationship we live. So before we get off of this episode, could you please speak on that?
Yeah. So I'm writing a book on how we take responsibility, and specifically how we take responsibility in relationships. When we say we care or we don't care about something, right? Then it's an expression of whether that's important or not to us, whether it's a priority. And when we organize the things we have to do on our to-do list, we prioritize. Now, the question that we're following when we prioritize is often maybe related to some bigger strategy, some mission or vision that we formulated. Very rarely do people look at their to-do list and ask themselves the question, who do I care about in my life? And therefore, how can I arrange my activities and my tasks and my to-dos, basically my life, around the question, for whom am I there? Who do I care for? Who do I care about? Because that little word care can express so much. And when we come to the question of how do we take responsibility in our lives, we can take responsibility for the what is there to do, or we can take responsibility for the who. Who do we show up for? Maybe you're familiar with the framework of the love languages, the five love languages, where we express our love for other people through, for example, kind words or little gifts. And I see taking true responsibility in your life or in other people's lives as the missing love language, right? Actually, truly showing up for someone, taking real responsibility is an expression of love, is an expression of care, which is why we're coming full circle. The book is called How to Care, How We Take how we take responsibility in our relationships. It's basically a transforming productivity book.
That's so cool. I will beg. I will send you many emails to come back on and elaborate on that topic because I feel very strongly about those types of things, love languages, talking about prioritizing relationships. And it does not get talked about enough as far as the stereotypical entrepreneurial journey, from my opinion. So I appreciate that you're doing
Yeah,
that work to put it
yeah,
into the
that's true.
world. The
Thank you.
last thing I have for you, I'm very excited, is it could be small or it could be big. It could be, something long term, but what inspires you?
Just earlier today, I was messaging someone very senior in my profession who at the time when I was reorienting and I made it look very straightforward, got out of investment as a career and like moved into coaching. It was just like, the dots are connecting and here I go. Of course, it was messy, right? Of course, I was insecure about it, didn't know what I was doing, where to turn, even where the resources, like what resources I would draw from to get orientation. And there are always these people in our lives that, for no reason, give back from where they're at in their careers. They give back, they mentor you, they take meetings, and even at the time, you know that you wouldn't, eh, you know, at all be able to afford taking their advice, like buying their advice, buying their services. And I feel very inspired by people who give back, no questions asked. They show up and they're like, hey, I can help you navigating these challenges. And, just in the recent couple of weeks, I had multiple points where I realized, oh, right, there's this person again who continues to show up for me, and not one person, multiple people. And I'm really inspired by just these like little acts of service.
Well, shout out to them. Shout out to those people.
Yeah.
Awesome, Julie. So this has been so cool. I am very inspired by not just you expressing gratitude to the people in your life, but also the ideas that you're bringing into these people's brains who are high performers and helping them do what they do. So if someone's interested in either following your journey or getting in touch, how can they find you?
JuliusBachmann.com. And if they're specifically interested in my coaching work, they can go to BachmannCatalyst.com. It's very simple. You can also find me on LinkedIn.
And I don't want to forget, how about your music?
Spotify, Julius Bachmann.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for your time, Julius. Danke.
Thank you. Likewise, it was a pleasure.